If I could create my very own UFC event, what would it look like? Well, first things first, I need to choose my arena. To me, this is an absolute no-brainer. I'm gonna be going with the Sphere in Las Vegas. This arena looks like it has the potential to be the coolest arena in UFC history. Next up, I need to choose my commentary team. I'm gonna be going with Michael Bisping, Dominic Cruz, and John Anik. And before you burn me at the stake for not going with Joe Rogan, allow me to explain myself. Obviously, this all comes down to personal opinion. I would say that Bisping and Dominic Cruz do the best job of breaking down the fights. The sheer amount of insight that you get from being a former UFC fighter trumps the amount of fights that you've commentated on before. And last but not least, I literally have a Joe Rogan poster in my room, so none of you fucks can tell me shit. Now with all that out of the way, let's jump into the first prelim fight. We're gonna be kicking things off with none other than Bo Nickal. As you all know, Bo Nickal is a future star of the sport. And by starting things off with him, we're gonna make sure that all the fans are in their seats from the jump. His opponent is gonna be Kelvin Gastelum, who's a clear step up in competition from Bo's last opponent. I would imagine that some people would like to see Bo fight somebody in the top 15. After all, he definitely is good enough to do so. But my response to that would be, you need to understand that rushing Bo to the top of the ranks would only be doing him a disservice. He's still young, he doesn't have that many MMA fights. So by forcing him to climb the ranks slowly, it'll make sure that once he gets to the top of the ranks, he'll be at the top of his game. And on the second prelim, we have Michael Venom Page versus Stephen Thompson. These guys are both very, very similar stylistically. They're both getting up there in age, and they're both pretty much very close to each other in the rankings. So as an MVP fan, this is an absolute dream matchup for me. And my third prelim fight is going to be very, very polarizing. Some of you are gonna like it, and a lot of you are going to hate it. We're going to be having a fighter make his MMA debut, and that fighter is none other than Jake Paul. And his opponent is going to be Nate Diaz, who is returning after some time away from the octagon. Many of you are going to argue that Nate would absolutely destroy Jake Paul, but I'm going to be making the case that this fight is actually a lot closer than you might think. First things first, I'm well aware that Nate Diaz is far superior on the ground, but this does not 100% guarantee that he's going to get a submission. And let's not forget what happened in the boxing match between these two. Obviously, MMA striking is very different from boxing, but Nate Diaz, as an MMA striker, primarily utilizes punches. His kicks are not very effective anyway. So it's fair to say that Jake has the advantage on the feet. And once again, I want to reiterate that I'm not saying Jake would win the fight. All I'm saying is it would be a very close fight. We have to remember that this is a Nate Diaz who's well past his prime. This is not prime Nate Diaz we're talking about here, and anything can happen in a fight. Moving into the fourth prelim, we have Chito Vera versus Davison Figueiredo. Figueiredo was in the flyweight division the majority of his career. He held the belt for a while in that division, and he's had one fight in the bantamweight division. Chito Vera is a career bantamweight, and overall I think this is a pretty close matchup. I'm a big fan of Chito Vera, and his fights are always a war, so this should be a pretty good fight. And on the last prelim, we have Khamzat Chimaev. I like Khamzat being here because with Bo Nickal being on the first prelim and Khamzat being on the last prelim, it's a good way to tease that potential matchup between those two later on down the line. His opponent will be Nassourdine Imavov. And without further ado, let's move into the main card. With the first fight on the main card, we got two fighters who are returning to the octagon for the first time in quite a long time. Francis Ngannou versus Stipe Miocic 3. Obviously in real life, Francis had a falling out with the UFC, but in a perfect world, I would be absolutely ecstatic to see Francis return. And who better for him to return to than Stipe Miocic, who's 1-1 against him. However, I do believe Francis would get the W, and it would set him up for a title shot against the winner of tonight's main event. With the second fight on the main card, we're moving down to the light heavyweight division. We got Jamal Hill versus Khalil Roundtree. This is a fight that was scheduled to happen at UFC 303, and it never ended up happening, so why not just reschedule it? Both guys are at similar stages in their career. They're both in their prime, and the winner of this fight will likely get a title shot sometime down the line. With the third fight on the main card, we have Aljamain Sterling versus Brian Ortega. In the previous two matchups, it was between strikers, so it's only right that we mix in a matchup that's between two elite grapplers. Aljamain Sterling was one of the top guys as a bantamweight. He's now 1-0 as a featherweight, so it's only right that he fights one of the top guys at featherweight now. Brian Ortega is long overdue for a fight, so this is the matchup to make. And now it is time for the co-main event of the night. We got Ilia Topuria defending his featherweight title against Max Holloway, who just had the best performance of his entire career at UFC 300. This is an absolutely legendary matchup. Ilia, the undefeated champ, who just knocked out Volkanovski, versus Max Holloway, who is an absolute legend of the sport. Arguably the best matchup of the night. And for the main event of the evening, as you've all seen by the thumbnail, we've got Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall. Out of all these fights, this is the one that I want to see the most in real life. Jon Jones has the undisputed heavyweight strap around his waist. Tom Aspinall has the interim heavyweight strap around his waist. So it's time to find out who the real baddest man on the planet is. It makes absolutely zero sense to me why Jon would be fighting Stipe next. He's already 36 years old and he's not getting any younger. The time to make this fight is now. We want to make this happen as soon as possible. I've heard the argument being tossed around that it would somehow taint Jon Jones' legacy if he were to lose to Aspinall. And I wholeheartedly disagree with this. And I think Ariel Helwani explains it best. So I'm going to toss the spotlight over to him. Peace out.
But I would remind Jones and some of his fans that there was once a time where the Shogun Huas of the world fought a young guy named Jon Jones, and the Rampages fought him, and you know those older guys fought the younger guy. And so that's kind of how this is supposed to work, the circle of life. It's supposed to just be this cyclical thing. If he doesn't want to partake in that, it's his right. It's his body, it's his life. But the train has to keep rolling along. It just has to. And belts aren't supposed to be, they're not supposed to be like lifetime achievement awards. It's supposed to be who's the baddest guy right now in that weight class. And I think it's Tom Aspinall. And so I would like to see him be crowned undisputed champion.